Lately, I've been feeling rather off. My job has been overwhelming, and almost every day I'm so drained that I can do little more than head straight home and collapse before the television. For months now, my routine hasn't changed at all. I finish my shift, plug in my headphones as I leave, silently praying no one tries to start a conversation, and then drive home. The ride isn't thrilling, but it worked. Or at least it did, until a few nights ago. That evening, I decided to change things up. Traffic was crawling. The rain was lashing down in torrents, and I was sick of trudging the same dismal route home. I thought I'd try a shortcut, a faster path through the labyrinth of central streets, an area cluttered with half-finished fixes and old crumbling buildings, a route I believed I knew well enough to navigate. Then, out of nowhere, I recalled the shopping plaza I used to frequent as a child. Back then it was enormous and bustling with life, complete with a merry-go-round in the dining hall, vivid neon signs everywhere, and an old sweet shop where my mother, let's call her Lila, would bribe me when I threw tantrums. Over time, though, the place began to wither. Shops shuttered and the crowds faded, until, as I'd heard, nearly everything was abandoned, except for a few discount stores clinging to life. I was already running behind schedule, and the idea of slicing through the plaza struck me like fate. I reasoned, why not? Even if it were nearly empty, it'd likely be faster than circling the block in the downpour. And maybe I'd get a small hit of nostalgia along the way. At the side, I found one of those unassuming service doors usually used by custodians or delivery folks. It wasn't marked at all, just a plain metal door set into a wall, yet it swung open with little effort. No chain, no rusted handle, just a gentle push that brought me into the building. Inside, the corridor was dimly lit, with fluorescent bulbs above flickering weakly every few seconds. The air was stale, as if undisturbed for ages, and there was a slight scent of choco that immediately hit me. I shrugged it off. After all, it was an old structure. At first, the atmosphere felt cool, almost as if I were stepping into a time capsule. The floors were laid with old white tiles edged in black, scuffed and cracked in several spots, while faded posters for long-forgotten shops plastered the walls. There was a soft hum in the background, perhaps from fans, but no voices or footsteps, only a heavy, unsettling silence. What struck me most was that deep quiet, not the kind you'd expect in an empty building, but a silence that felt weighty, as if the structure itself were holding its breath. Most of the shops were exactly as I'd imagined, boarded up, empty shelves with barely clinging signage. A few windows still held relic displays, mannequins dressed in outdated attire, old movie posters for blockbusters long past, and faded banners with oddly hopeful slogans for a place like this. I felt a twinge of unease, but kept convincing myself it was merely the natural vibe of an abandoned shopping center, a ghostly echo of its former self. Still, I quickened my pace, eager to get back into the fresh air. That's when I noticed something odd about the layout. It didn't feel right. It had been years since I'd last visited, so maybe my memory was off. But the hallways seemed unnaturally long, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense, as if the angles themselves were skewed. I'd wander for what felt like minutes, only to turn a corner and end up facing the same stretch of vacant storefronts. Eventually, I reached what was left of the dining area, a space completely empty except for one table sitting dead center with a single chair pulled out just slightly as though someone had bolted away in a hurry. On the table rested a styrofoam cup, and I swear I saw steam rising from it. In that moment, a chill of fear hit me, the familiar cold rush when your body senses something amiss before your mind fully grasps it. I stood there staring at that cup for what felt like ages, trying to convince myself it was nothing more than a stray trickle of warm air from a vent, or perhaps evidence of a maintenance worker passing through like me. I even called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" But there was no answer. I knew I should have turned back, taken my chances in the rain, yet I reassured myself that it was just an empty building. People often leave strange things behind, right? So I kept moving. I rounded a corner where an exit should have been, but it wasn't there. No double glass doors, no faded "thank you for shopping" sign, just another long hallway stretching deeper into the complex. That's when it hit me. I wasn't getting out anytime soon. I can't pinpoint when the oddness shifted into full-blown terror, but it happened swiftly. The corridor started feeling uncanny. These weren't ordinary hallways anymore. They extended far longer than they ought to, and every time I thought I recognized a turn, it either led somewhere entirely new or looped me right back to my starting point. I tried to keep calm. Old buildings are confusing, right? But the further I walked, the more it seemed like the entire place was shifting around me. Then I began noticing small details. The mannequins in the shop windows weren't always in the same positions. One moment they'd be posed normally, arms outstretched in outfits from decades ago. The next one would have its head tilted toward me or its hand raised as if pointing. Even the advertisements on the walls looked off. What at first seemed normal from a distance turned blurry and smudged up close, as if someone had erased their features, though I could still tell they were faces. The worst part was when I thought I recognized one. It resembled me, distorted and warped. I pulled out my phone, hoping to use its map or at least check the time. But it was useless. No signal, no Wi-Fi, just a spinning icon that wouldn't vanish. 1 second, the screen showed 4:47 p.m. The next, it jumped to 11:13, then reset entirely, flashing zeros as if it were just powering on for the first time. I tried retracing my steps, backtracking the way I'd come, but nothing lined up. The dining area with the steaming cup was gone, replaced by a dead end lined with boarded up shop fronts I didn't recall seeing before. I kept moving because what choice did I have? Yet the deeper I ventured, the stranger things became. Some corridors were so long that my phone's flashlight couldn't reach the end. The beam just faded into darkness, as though the building were swallowing the light whole. Soon after, a faint whisper began. At first barely audible, like someone just out of earshot, yet unmistakably present. I couldn't quite decipher the words. It was just a low murmur, reminiscent of the flickering fluorescent lights, but with a hint of life. Every now and then I thought I heard a word, maybe even my name, but I wasn't sure if I was imagining things. Then footsteps began to echo softly behind me, a gentle, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. I assumed it was just the echo of my own steps, so I paused. When I spun around, shining my light down the hall, nothing was there, just emptiness. The sound had stopped too, as if whoever or whatever was making it knew I was listening. I waited, holding my breath, and when I resumed walking, the footsteps started again, this time faster and louder, as though something were closing in on me. I didn't dare look back. I simply started running. I don't think I've ever felt as relieved as I did when I saw an exit sign after what felt like endless corridors, shifting mannequins and unplaceable whispers. There, at the far end of the hallway, hung a bright red exit sign above a heavy steel door, a lifeline amid all the darkness, a promise that I wasn't trapped forever. I can't recall exactly how fast I moved. One moment I was frozen, and the next I was sprinting toward that beacon, my footsteps echoing like distant gunshots in the empty space. My heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from relief, as I reached the door. It was massive, yet it swung open easily, and as it did, A rush of fresh, rain-scented air hit my face. I stepped out onto a street I didn't recognize, though it looked like any other part of the city, with headlights slicing through twilight and pedestrians carrying umbrellas or shopping bags in the cool evening. I actually laughed, strangely a shaky, almost delirious laugh, at the absurdity of it all. After all the fear and weirdness in that crumbling plaza, here I was, standing in the middle of a busy street, as if nothing had happened. I even muttered to myself, "You really need to get a grip." But then I noticed something else. At first, I couldn't quite pinpoint it because I was busy calming down and processing everything. Yet as I watched the people around me, I realized they weren't moving normally. Their motions were stiff, as if their bodies were following a set script they couldn't break free from. A woman in a scarlet coat walked past, her arms swinging in an identical loop over and over, and a man across the street adjusted his hat repeatedly, as if stuck in a glitch. Even the cars were eerily silent. No engines, no honking, only a low hum like a white noise machine trying to mimic what a real street should sound like. My stomach sank, and the relief I'd felt evaporated, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. Slowly I turned around, desperately hoping to see something normal behind me, but what I saw was even worse. The shopping center was still there. It wasn't the same door I had exited through. This one was taller, darker, with warped glass that shimmered in the light, as if the building had followed me, refusing to let me go. The laughter from moments earlier had vanished completely, replaced by a crushing realization I hadn't escaped. I don't know why I went back inside. Maybe it was panic, desperation, or perhaps because the plaza wouldn't let me leave no matter what. But as soon as I stepped back through that door, I knew I'd made a mistake. The air was colder and sharper. My breath fogged up, and a faint smell of mildew hit me like a punch. The layout had changed once again. The corridors felt narrower. The walls seemed to close in as if they were alive and watching my every move. Each step made the floor creak under my weight, as though the building itself were groaning in discontent. I found myself back in the center, and the mannequins were even worse now. They lined the windows and slumped in the corners. Their heads were missing, replaced by smooth necks bent at odd angles, as if silently staring even though they had no eyes. Some still held out their hands in frozen, almost pleading gestures. I tried to avert my gaze, but I couldn't shake the feeling they were moving closer every time I looked away. The soft murmurs in the air deepened into a low, almost growling sound that made me wonder if I was really hearing things. It resembled a crowd speaking at once in a language I couldn't understand. The echoes bouncing off the walls, filling the space with a constant oppressive noise that made it nearly impossible to think. Then I noticed the shop signs that had once been blank now glowed, not with regular ads, but with messages, some boldly flashing my name, others bearing phrases that made my stomach churn, like, "We've been waiting for you," or even a sign that simply said, "Don't run." I didn't know what to do. My legs moved on autopilot while my brain screamed for me to flee. But there was no escape. I turned a corner and froze. It was the dining area again. At first glance, it looked just as I remembered, peeling tiles and a dim, drab light. But now, the table with the styrofoam cup wasn't tucked away to the side. It stood dead center, as if it had been waiting for me. The steam still curled lazily from the cup's contents, yet the chair across from it was now pulled out and facing me. Seated there was a mannequin unlike any I'd seen before, its cracked plastic skin with a smooth, almost disturbingly human hand wrapped around the cup, and its head tilted as if it were gazing directly at me, even though it had no real face. I stared at it until my legs finally gave out. and I slid to the floor, pressing my back against the wall as my chest heaved with shallow breaths. That's when I felt it, a strange sensation from the wall behind me. It wasn't solid at all. It felt soft, warm, and moved subtly, pulsing like I was leaning against something alive. I jerked upright, nearly toppling over, and my hands flew to the wall as if I needed proof that it wasn't what I feared. But it was real, pulsing steadily beneath my fingers, rhythmic like a heartbeat. Panic overtook me, and before I knew it, I was running blindly through endless corridors. I stopped thinking. The walls pulsed. Whispers chased me, and the lights flickered in jerky, stuttering bursts. The shadows on the walls twisted and morphed into impossible shapes, and I screamed for help, screaming until my throat felt raw, though the sound was swallowed by the heavy air. I rounded corner after corner without thinking, sprinting past identical shop fronts while the overhead lights flickered so violently I could barely see. Up ahead, I noticed something different, a glowing green exit sign above a solid steel door. It stood apart from the others, exuding an aura of normality that felt genuine. Torn between staying and taking my chance with this door, I hesitated just as I heard shuffling footsteps and low murmurs behind me, sounds that edged ever closer. I didn't wait. I dashed for the door and flung it open. For a moment I thought I had made it, the rush of fresh air, the promise of open space. But when I looked around, I realized I was back in the dining area. At first, it appeared empty again, just as before, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw I wasn't alone. Dozens of figures, what looked like people, sat at the tables in perfect stillness, facing each other. No one spoke or moved, and none of them had any distinct features. Their heads were smooth, blank ovals of flesh-colored nothingness. Their hands rested neatly on the tables. My eyes darted to the center of the room, and there it was once more, the table with the styrofoam cup, its steam curling lazily. Except now the mannequin was gone. I couldn't move or breathe. At first the figures didn't react, but then one by one they began to turn slowly, methodically facing me in unison. I stumbled backward, my leg trembling so badly I nearly fell. My back hit the wall, and I realized there was nowhere to run. They just stared, whatever the faceless version of staring might be. I don't know how long I stood frozen until I heard the whispers again, but this time they came not from the walls, but from the figures themselves. Dozens of them speaking in overlapping, distorted murmurs as if trying and failing to form words. Then one of them stood up. I couldn't move as the figures rose from their seats one by one, their motions stiff and unnatural, as if invisible strings were pulling them upward. They didn't speak. Only that terrible overlapping whisper filled the air until it pressed down on me so hard I thought my chest would cave in. They surrounded me, slowly forming a tight circle, their blank faces tilted as if studying me. My heart pounded in my ears, yet my legs refused to respond. I was trapped. One of them stepped closer, its jerky yet deliberate movement sending a chill down my spine. Its hand, cold as metal left out in winter, brushed my face, and a jolt shot through me. Everything went black. When I came to, I wasn't standing. I was sitting at the very table in the center of the dining hall. A styrofoam cup filled with steaming liquid sat before me just as it had earlier. For a moment I wondered if I had imagined the whole ordeal. Maybe I'd passed out from stress or dehydration. I looked down, ready to grab the cup and force myself back to reality, but the hands on the table weren't mine. They were smooth, plastic, and joined at the knuckles like those of a mannequin. I tried to move them. They obeyed, yet everything felt disconnected, as if my commands weren't truly mine. My breath caught in my throat as I surveyed the dining area, The figures were once again seated at their tables, silent and unmoving, but I could feel their unyielding gaze on me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just occurred, yet all I felt was the crushing weight of realization. I was one of them now. I have no idea how long I sat there, staring at my altered hands and the cup before me. Time itself seemed to lose meaning. I wasn't sure if I was still alive in the way I used to be. And yet, I could still think, still feel, and still remember who I once was.